Imagine a room. It is late 1944, an abandoned villa in the Italian countryside. The war is a distant rumble outside, but inside there is only silence and dust. An Allied officer enters. He is a major, perhaps a colonel, a man of education and refinement. He is exhausted from months of sleeping in the mud. This room looks like paradise. Mahogany furniture, leather chairs, order. But then he notices it. On the far wall, there is a beautiful 19th century oil painting, but it is hanging crooked. It is tilted just 15 degrees to the left. To a common soldier, this means nothing. But to a disciplined officer whose entire life is built on precision, rules, and straight lines, it is an itch in the brain. It disrupts the harmony of the room. The war outside is chaos, but this room should be perfect. Without thinking, purely on instinct, he walks across the room. He reaches out to gently nudge the frame back to horizontal, to make it right. He doesn't know it, but he has just lost the war. The moment his fingers touch the frame, the silence is shattered. Click. The explosion vaporizes the room instantly. This was not an accident. It was a calculated murder weapon designed by the German Wehrmacht. They didn't target his body with a bullet. They targeted his mind with a psychological trigger. They weaponized his need for perfection. Welcome to WW2 Survival. Today, we uncover the story of the crooked picture, the most sophisticated intellectual trap of World War II. To understand this trap, we have to look at the German mindset in the final years of the war. By 1944, the Wehrmacht was retreating. They could no longer stop the Allied advance with sheer manpower, so the German pioneer units began a campaign of micro-sabotage. They asked a terrifying question: how do we kill the enemy leadership without firing a shot? German intelligence profiled their enemy perfectly. They knew that British and American officers were often drawn from the upper classes. These were men who valued culture. When they occupied a captured town, the high-ranking officers would naturally requisition the nicest chateau for their headquarters. The Germans knew that grunts, common infantry, wouldn't care about a tilted picture. They were looking for wine or loot. But an officer? An officer is trained to spot errors. An officer corrects mistakes. So the German engineers designed a trap specifically for the man in charge. It was a game of intellectual arrogance. The trap was a message. We know who you are, we know you are refined, and we will use your own sophistication to kill you. Let's deconstruct the engineering. It is a masterpiece of simplicity. The German engineers would select a heavy painting with a solid wooden frame. Behind the wall, they would hollow out a cavity and pack it with 5 to 10 kilograms of high explosives, usually TNT or picric acid. The trigger was the genius part. They typically used a tension release igniter, like the Zugzünden 35 pull igniter 35. A thin, almost invisible piano wire was attached to the back of the picture frame. This wire went through a tiny drilled hole in the wall, connecting directly to the detonator pin hidden behind the plaster. Here is the deadly trick. Zero slack. The Germans would deliberately hang the picture crooked. The wire behind it was pulled taut. If you move the picture up to straighten it, or sideways to align it, you pulled the pin. The fuse burn time was often instantaneous. There was no click, no hiss, just immediate annihilation. Why was this so effective? Because it relied on muscle memory. When you see a crooked object in your own home, you don't analyze it tactically. You fix it automatically. It is a domestic reflex. The Germans turned a harmless domestic habit into a trigger for death. They knew that in the safety of a bedroom, the Allied officer would lower his guard. He would stop thinking like a soldier and start thinking like a civilian. And that is exactly when the trap snaps shut. This is where the story gets truly dark. This trap wasn't just about explosives. It was about behavioral psychology. Humans have a natural aversion to asymmetry. It's called the urge for order. When we see something tilted, it creates a subconscious tension. We feel a mild anxiety until it is resolved. For a military officer whose career is defined by straight uniforms, straight marching lines, and straight maps, this urge is amplified. The German engineers were betting on this specific personality trait. By fixing the picture, the Allied officer was symbolically trying to restore order to the world the Germans had broken. The trap punished him for that desire. This trap also served a secondary purpose. Terror. Imagine the aftermath. An explosion rips through the HQ. The colonel is taken. The investigation finds the wire. He died because he straightened a picture. The news spreads like a virus. Suddenly, every object in every room becomes a suspect. Is that book on the table a trap? Is that loose floorboard a trap? Is the toilet handle rigged? This causes decision paralysis. Allied officers became terrified of their own environment. They would sleep in gardens rather than in comfortable beds. They would force lower-ranking soldiers to enter rooms first to test the furniture. It degraded morale and slowed down the advance. The Germans didn't need to kill every officer. They just needed to make every officer afraid to touch anything. The fear was real. General Mark Clark, commander of the U.S. Fifth Army in Italy, reportedly warned his staff constantly about the German toys. There are accounts from Naples in 1943 where officers moved into a seemingly safe waterfront building. They swept for mines on the floor. They checked the doors. Everything was clear. But one officer saw a frame on the wall that was slightly askew. He reached out. The explosion blew the facade off the building. The Allies had to learn the hard way. A new doctrine emerged, the empty house policy. Soldiers were taught a new rule of survival. If it looks perfect, it's a trap. If it looks wrong, it's a trap. Combat engineers began carrying long poles with hooks. They would stand in the hallway, hook the picture frame, and pull it from a safe distance while crouching behind a wall. More often than not, the picture would crash to the floor harmlessly. But sometimes, boom, and in the dust and smoke, the surviving soldiers would realize they were waiting for us. Think about the cruelty of that moment. The victim isn't killed in combat holding a weapon. He is killed while doing something gentle. The Germans had erased the line between the battlefield and the home. The crooked picture trap remains one of the most chilling examples of asymmetric warfare in history. It proved that you can turn a man's greatest strength, his intellect and his desire for order, into his fatal weakness. When we think of World War II, we think of massive tanks and rockets, but we should remember the crooked picture. Because while a tank can kill your body, a trap like this kills your sense of reality. The German engineers who set these traps were architects of anxiety. They understood that the most dangerous terrain in war isn't the jungle or the desert. The most dangerous terrain is the human mind. So the next time you walk into a room and see a picture hanging slightly crooked, and you feel that itch in your fingers to reach out and fix it, stop. Remember the officers of 1944 and ask yourself, is it worth the risk? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the psychological chess match of World War II, hit that subscribe button for World War II Survival. We explore the history that isn't written in the textbooks.